All right, welcome to our first lecture. Woo! And this craziness. Hope everyone is doing well. We're going to talk a little bit about the play and the characters in this wonderful lecture series of starting week one. Just a backtrack and reminder about some Greek mythology that we talked about earlier. We start off with our Greek myths originating around 1500 BC. Provide examples of good and bad behavior as we talked about, and we read different ones. So we kind of discussed this in class a little bit, went through these notes. We talked about different characteristics, and one that we could say, just to kind of tie in Prometheus, the polio vaccine was given for free by the doctor who discovered it, when he could have charged lots of money for it. So he gave up a lot of personal wealth, and we can kind of compare that to Prometheus, how he gave up personal glory to save humanity from Zeus's anger. So there's all these different characteristics and beliefs that we see. Greeks were tough, they were restless, ambitious, we discussed. Honor was very important, and the Greeks were very vengeful if wronged. So we talked about in the beginning there was chaos, and then we had Gaia. She gave birth to Uranus, and they got married. There was the Tartarus as the underworld, Eros of love, and we discussed all these different stories before: the 100-hand giants, the Cyclopses, the Titans, the war, all the wonderful things that happened in the beginning. And we have, just kind of give an idea of our main characters, we talked about Zeus, king of gods, thunder and lightning, known for having many affairs and many children, and some of them were gods and goddesses because as the Greeks conquered territories, they would take on the new goddess and married them to Zeus. So as the Greeks would take over a region, there would be a certain figure there, and they would say, okay, well, this person's now married to Zeus, so now they're Greek. So it's kind of a way that they would constantly tie in other people's faith or religion. But he is the spiritual father of gods and men. Even though he didn't make them, they still spiritually believe in him. We have Poseidon, who we talked about, god of the sea and earthquakes. Hades of the underworld. We talked about Prometheus and Epimetheus. And now we want to get to Medea. So Medea's family line is actually quite interesting. So we start off with Medea. Now Medea is the protagonist of our series, of our play, and she is a sorceress and a witch, and she shares many traits from her father. Now, the thing with sorcerers and witches is they're not actually common in Greek mythology. The gods or goddesses generally feared sorceresses and witches. They had this interesting kind of one eye open relationship with them. So the fact that she is a sorcerer and witch was a very scary thing for the gods. And if it was scary for the gods, it was terrifying for the average person. So most people would really be nervous around Medea. Now, she hates her father, quite so. Her father was not a nice person, and eventually she'll be struck by love for Jason. Some might say, in some stories, it was just, oh wow, he's a good-looking dude. That sounds like a good way to get out of here. And other times, it was Aphrodite, the goddess of love, who hit her with one of her son's Cupid's arrows, and she fell in love. Whatever the reason, she's going to fall deeply and madly in love. Her background, she has this Iranian Slavic origin. We'll see in a map pretty shortly that she is really from an area of current-day Georgia, so that's Slavic kind of origin, and Slavic meaning, I guess you would say, those of Eastern European Russian descent. And she's an outsider in Greece. She's going to be known what's called as the Other, which we've discussed before. She will be othered consistently throughout her story. And again, if we look at, and this is where she comes from, is the land of Colchis. And this is kind of right off, again, what you would say, as modern day Georgia right over here. So they sailed from this general area all the way through, and you'll see the story of the Jason and the Argonauts as we read, but they'll sail to here, and this is where they're going to go ahead and reach her. So it's a very, very different and foreign land compared to the Greek world. Okay, Medea's father is Aeetes. He is the king of Colchis, again, modern-day Georgia. He's another famed sorcerer. His power was probably a little bit more than Medea. He was an original sorcerer, so he was one of the first of his sorcerer kind, you could say. He was really good at shape-shifting, animal creation. He has a son and a daughter, and again, as we know, he's just not the nicest guy in town. And what's important to know about Aedes, he's a son of Helios. Well, who's Helios? Helios is actually the grandfather of Medea, and he is the Titan of the sun. If you notice on the bottom image here, or even this image here, the sun in Greek mythology, his horse chariot carries the sun out in the morning and brings it back to day. So he is literally the sun. So she has a really, really strong lineage in comparison to many other figures in the stories that we read or plays. She has a direct lineage to Helios the Titan. Helios was not one of the Titans who fought against Zeus. He fought with Zeus, which is why he's still around. And he's very, very powerful. Obviously, he is the personification of the sun. Helios is also very strict, and Aedes happens to be his favorite child. So Medea has some favor with Helios. Helios won't really show up in our play at all, but at the end, at least in the version that we're going to read, it kind of skips it over, but we're going to go back and read the original version for how the original end is, and he'll play a part. Just kind of a side note, if you've ever read the Odyssey or heard anything about it, Circe would be her aunt. She's a famed sorceress. She was eventually cast off and lived on an island. She meets Odysseus, and she has a long literary life. Circe is very famous in many different mythological stories, but that's going to be her aunt. They actually interact once, and if we have time, I'll try to see if I can display their interaction with each other in a book called Circe, but we'll see. Random note, this is Pasiphae, and all she's really known for is she birthed the Minotaur. She's another sorceress, very evil, manipulative, and she created the half-man, half-bull person, so we'll leave her there. Okay, and then by marriage, the other lineage is Jason. He is the prince of Iolcos. He is deprived of his throne, as the story would say, and you either have read or will read. He's deprived of his throne by his uncle Peleus, so he has to set on a quest to prove his worth. And eventually he'll see Medea, and whether he thinks she's beautiful, probably, or scary, also, and helpful, definitely, he marries her, and his traits will play a very important part of our play. Okay. So, and just to recap the myth, I do still want you to read it, if you have not, because I'm asking for specific details about Jason's traits that you'll see in the text. But a recap of this. Jason's uncle Peleus had usurped or taken over the throne from Iolcus, from Jason's father Isaeon. To protect Jason, he was sent away. In the story, you'll see he was trained by the centaurs, the half horse, half people. He returned to take the throne back. And then, again, he now has to go find this. The king says, I'll open up and talk to you if you can find this golden fleece. So, this golden fleece becomes tied to the recovery of the throne in his kingdom. So he forms the Argonauts, which are, respectively, the Avengers of the day. Because he assembled a crew of heroes, Hercules, and other really famous people. So, it was like, Avengers assemble. Only in Greek, which I can't speak. The ship was named the Argos. And so therefore they were the Argonauts, and they sailed beyond what we know as the Greek boundaries of the world. Okay, so this is where all they sailed in the Blue Line. So they did a lot of exploring. It wasn't like they went straight to they didn't start here and go, hey, we're just gonna go right here. They're like, let's go everywhere. So there's a whole, if you're more interested in this, there's tons of stories that they had. One of the most famous ones is they actually went to the land of the Amazons, killed the Amazon queen, and there was this whole story with Hercules, and it's pretty tragic and fascinating, but if you ever wanted to read more. Okay, back to Medea. So again, we know her father was Aedes. When Jason arrived, she fell in love with Jason, and she used her powers to help Jason obtain the golden fleece. And in turn, he promised to take her back to Greece with him as his wife. As she said, you know what, if he becomes king, then I will be queen, and sure, I will help. So again, read the play and you'll see about Jason and think to yourself, could Jason have accomplished any of those tasks if it wasn't for the help of Medea? Okay, so they escape from Colchis. She flees her home with Jason and the Argonauts. As soon as they'll eventually get the golden fleece and her wonderful manipulative ways, as the story will say. And they leave in a hurry because her father is not going to be very happy. Now, the thing that's really important about Greek culture is that burials and the burial rites and the ritual was incredibly important. If you ever seen movies like Troy or read any other myths, armies would stop after a day of battle and would be allowed to collect their dead and bury them. It was, even among enemies, would the idea would be is if you bury someone, you need to give them a coin so they could travel to the underworld and have money, a payment to cross the river. Otherwise, they'll be stuck in kind of like a purgatory. And if you don't bury them correctly, they could be in the underworld with missing limbs or eyes or other things. So to make sure that they're whole, their spirit is whole in the underworld, you had to bury them. So all Greek culture is very familiar with this. Medea, in her flight, her father's ship was going faster than her because her father is more powerful and has more magic. So in order to stop this from happening, her younger brother happens to be on board, and you can see in the image over here, she dismembers or cuts into pieces her younger brother and spreads the body all across the ocean as they're flying, so that way her father has to stop and pick up each piece, put it back together, and then be allowed to bury him. It's only through this way that they were able to escape and gain enough lead that her father could not catch her. So off the bat, Medea not only tricks her father, which, we could say if he's not a good guy, that's an honorable thing in the sense where she wants to leave, but she kills and dismembers her brother, breaking the most sacred Greek rule ever in order to flee. So she has absolutely no qualms or problems getting what she wants and breaking any tradition to get what she wants. So this is the character of Medea so far. And this is not the playwright. This is the mythology. So Medea, as a favor to Jason, convinced Peleus' daughter that she could make him young again. Peleus again is the current ruler of Iolcus, where Jason wants to rule. So Medea goes, I got a plan. Like, hey, watch this. She puts an old dismembered sheep in boiling water, and a young lamb emerged. It's like, aha! See, you go from old to young. It'll work for you too. Magic. And she probably had the magic to actually do that. So convinced Peleus' daughters, dismembered again, cut up the old man, the king, into pieces and put it in boiling water, so that way, hey, he'll walk out of the boiling water and he'll be a-okay. Medea, of course, was nowhere to be found. So, in other words, that was just a way to kill the king. And probably not also, she didn't technically do it, she got someone else to kill him. Pretty horrible. So now we have 2 instances of blood on her hands, and 2 instances of which Jason allowed it to happen and didn't really say anything. So, after all, he wanted to be king. So keep that in mind too. Jason was okay with this. Eventually, so after the death of Peleus, since Peleus still was the king, the line of succession, or the next king, would have to be his son, Acastus. And he was like, yo, you are terrible people. Get the hell out of here. So they leave, and they eventually find themselves in a very populous city called Corinth. And they're under the care of this king named King Creon. So they are kicked out of their original home and in a brand new home. Now, Creon sees Jason as a real heir. He doesn't have a real good son. I think he only has daughters. So he needs an heir, and he sees Jason, this mythological hero, this, his legend of the Argonauts, whether we know the truth or not. But the legend is that he's famous. So he sees him and says, hey, look, I know you're with Medea, but one, she's getting older. It's been a few years since you married her. By the time they went to Iolcus and found themselves in Creon, their kids have grown up a little bit. Their kids are like 10 or 11 years old, or somewhere around there. So she's getting older. It's like, hey, my daughter is very young, very beautiful. You can marry her, be the king of Corinth, one of the most populous cities in all the Greek world, other than like Athens and Thebes. It was like one of the top 5 cities in the world. And really, Medea is this foreigner. Like, why would you stay with a foreigner? You want to marry you're Greek. Marry a Greek girl. And this is what Creon basically convinces Jason. And Jason basically will say, yeah, that sounds good to me. He's also getting a little bit tired of Medea. And so he says, you know what? Let's do this. So he's betrothed or married to Creon's daughter, Glaus. And this is where our play begins. Is when all of this has already happened. Okay? So we'll continue on just a little information about the play, and then you can go back and answer the questions that were on the Google document that was shared. So about the play. So it was written by Sophocles, and Sophocles was one of the major Greek tragedians, which means he wrote tragedies. This was not meant to be a happy play of this, and it's meant to paint some great scene of human passion and suffering, and let us think. Like, these plays, after it happens, make us really evaluate our position and our humanity and our role in society. So this is kind of the purpose of how these plays are set up. He was born September 23rd, in case you're have the same birthday. In Salamis, on an island off the coast of Greece, which a very famous battle took place many years ago. Many years ago. Okay, so one of the things that we have, and you kind of go over here, and we notice this word called chorus. So before, this is, again, you're not going to be tested on this, so don't worry, but it'll be in one of the questions. But and it's good to know, so you know, like, every time you see chorus, you're like, who the hell are these people? There wasn't really narrators as we know it, like, right, where we have Harry Potter, and Harry went into the room and took out his magic potion and drank it so that way he could turn into a dragon. I don't know. So, but there was a narrator. Well, before there were narrators, there was something called a chorus, and the chorus usually expressed the thought of the character. They were basically what was known as a narrator. They represented Greek society on stage. Oops. They passed judgment or characters and actions. They summarized scenes or gave previews. They were essentially a part of the play. And in the play that we're going to read, they kind of split them up into two choruses. There's Medea's savage chorus. Savage meaning, right, barbarian, lustful, angry, revengeful. The savage chorus is her thoughts. So it's her thoughts are expressed through these servants or people known as the chorus. The other chorus is the Greek chorus, which is Greek society, and so they are going to narrate their thoughts and actions. And you'll see the chorus, and it was usually a group of people, and they would all speak together. They had masks and robes, platform shoes. People had horns to speak of, just the general actors. So that's kind of how the chorus works and how the play would look like in general. And the structure is, and again, since we're not reading the actual play itself, we're going to go through and just talk about a little bit of how it's structured. You'd have a prologue, because again, this is how we get our Act 1, Act 2, our modern day plays, which will be important because we are going to read Romeo and Juliet, and we're going to see this transition happen. But there's a prologue, which opening scene, which a background of the staff, usually with the actors. There's the parados, the entrance of the chorus, then the episodes, which follow. This is where the action happens. That's what we would consider the act. The statisments, which is between each episode, the chorus provides insight, criticism, commentary. And if you notice, they're all wearing masks in the statisms because they're supposed to be these unseen people, are supposed to blend in. And then the exodus, which is the final scene of the play. So typically what you'd have is the episodes and statismons kind of going back and forth. In other words, the action, the thought, the action and the thought. And we'll see a little bit in our version of the play. Our main themes that we're going to be dealing with is Medea as the woman, the feminine both as a loyal wife, nurturing mother, but then also as a terrible mother in other ways. We'll definitely see revenge and power and greed. All three of those things really come up. Medea as the other, the barbarian sorceress and introducer from an uncivilized land. So she's going to be, right, really in Greek culture, if you go back to it in ancient Greek culture, anyone who wasn't Greek was a barbarian. In other words, they were a savage, unenlightened person, and they were not typically welcomed in most of Greek society. When if they were, they were kept an eye on. And then Medea has this hero, as honor-obsessed, intent upon action and reputation, and fearing laughter by peers. Medea's actions, you could argue, are heroic in thought, in that the reason before we get to some of the mass murder or that she commits, everything so far is based on the fact that, there was an honor, that there was a marriage, there was a vow, and you can't break vows. So we'll discuss these themes in, a little bit more once the play ends. And ultimately, the essay that we're going to be writing is, who is responsible truly for the death of the children? Would it be Jason, or was it going to be Medea? And we'll have to figure that part out. Okay, so that ends. And then we have two lines, and this is how the original play is going to work. And what I want you to do is kind of read through this, and I'll read a little bit right now, and then I just want you to answer the lines or the questions, and I'll restate them and put them on Classic. But I want you to answer these questions. So this is the opening of the play, the original play, and again, I mean, the original play has these huge, long dialogues. So that's why we're reading this condensed version. Excuse me. The nurse who was with Medea in her land and came back with her, she's gonna have this part. She says, "I wish the Argo had never spread its wings and flown to Colchis through the clashing rocks. I wish the pine tree on the slopes of Pelion had not been felled, not split to feathery oars to pledge the arms of the Argonauts." So in other words, she's saying that I wish the ship was never built, right? Because you need trees to make a ship. "Oh, why did Peleus, the king of Colchis, send them for the golden fleece? If they had never come, my mistress Medea would not have sailed back to Colchis with them, dazed with passion for their leader Jason. Then she would have not made King Peleus' daughters kill their own father. And then she'd not have come to settle here in Corinth, but she has." So, and then we want to take one of the questions. It's just, what is... summarize the nurse's lines into 4 events. What words does the nurse use that show us her perspective? So I just want you to look a little bit at the tone of this saying and summarize everything into 4. What are the 4 main events that happened? Okay, so that's going to be, now again, this will be on your document. Then finally the nurse says, "But now the house is full of hate, and my dear girl is ill with it. For Jason has become a traitor to his children and my mistress. He abandons her to lie in a royal bed. He's marrying the king's daughter, Creon's child. My poor Medea loses all her rights and honors everything. He swore an oath," she cries. "He gave his word. I trusted him." She begs the gods to witness the reward from Jason after all she did for him. She lies not eating, slumping into grief, melting the hours of life away in tears. So we get this image of what Medea is like at the start of the play, and it's hard for us, though we see Jason as this person who's like, yeah, he's going to be king of this new area, he's breaking this vow. So it's hard for us to feel a lot of pity for Jason at this moment. And what are the words in the passage capture the mood of this scene? So pick a couple words that you think captures the mood and just tell me why. And this is kind of how our play is going to open. When we talk again, we'll read through our condensed play a little bit, and we'll discuss a little bit more. But thank you so much for listening. That ends our little PowerPoint presentation lecture series 1. Hopefully not of many, but